Does Sukuna have the potential to be one of the greatest anime villains of all time? Well, if I can't convince you by the end of this video that he's something special, I'm gonna have you do something. Now, this is a character breakdown, not a Shibuya recap, so things will be out of order at times. With that said, let's begin. The first thing that stands out for me about Sukuna is the presence he has. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in anime so far. And here are a few examples that illustrate this. The first is right when he awakens. And in that moment, Sukuna instantly takes command of the situation. Up until that point, Jogo had been threatening the two girls when it dawns on him that his arm has now been completely severed. Within a second of waking up, Sukuna's dissecting people for being too close to him. And that completely changes the power dynamic in the room. We pan down to Sukuna, who warns Jogo he has 1 second, then demands Jogo move. And of course, Jogo does. Just like that, Sukuna is in complete control of this situation. And remember, Jogo is no slouch. This is a dude who just destroyed sorcerers with ease. He's been hanging around Geto and Mahito, and now he's basically wetting himself at the mere sight of Sukuna. When he's told to move, he doesn't just move either. He puts a huge amount of distance between himself and Sukuna instantly, and looks just as terrified as the girls. Speaking of, let's talk about those girls quick. It's one thing to portray characters as being scared of the big bad by having them or the narrator tell us. It's quite another to show us that, which is exactly what happens here. Because they aren't saying, oh my god, it's Sukuna. We don't get the silly narration and over-explanation Jujutsu Kaisen tends to do. No, these girls are so terrified by his mere presence that he has them trying to make sure they're able to keep breathing. That is a special kind of terror and fear. Sukuna walks over, and all he has to say is you hold your heads quite high, and they instantly know to kneel. Again, the presence here is insane. That's not a normal reaction to someone saying those words, and yet they understood instantaneously, they are beneath him and they must comply. And what makes this scene even better is that we see the repercussions of it too. Jogo doesn't kneel low enough, and that causes him to lose the top part of his head. So this dude listened on command and still lost part of his head because he only bent down to one knee. I love the way that the character's reactions to Sukuna prop him up as something special here, but then we also see it too when not being quite compliant enough has serious consequences. We see even more of that as the scene continues. The way he approaches and has to allow them to speak really makes him feel like a god talking to mere peasants. They can barely make out what they are trying to say. They don't dare lift their heads until he says to do so. And still, even that isn't enough because they make one mistake. They try bargaining with him. Gods don't bargain with peasants, and their attempt to gain leverage on him leads to a swift death. He instantly explodes Mimiko's head, and her friend lashes out and suffers a similar fate. Everything we've been shown so far has reinforced the fact that Sukuna is in fact as big a deal as he's portrayed as. Jogo is now allowed to speak, and he shows he learned from the girl's mistake. He asks Sukuna for nothing and states all he wanted was Sukuna's return. He does make a suggestion that he make a pact with Yuji to gain perpetual authority over him while he's in control. And this would benefit Sukuna, not Jogo. And in the most badass response ever, even with all the current leverage he has, Sukuna declines. He says there's no need because he has plans of his own. And think about how insane this is. He has an opportunity to take over Yuji permanently, and he declines because he's already figured out how to do it, and he'd rather do it his own way. It's so cool, but we'll get back to that later. To reward Jogo for waking him and respecting his authority, Sukuna says if Jogo can land one hit, he'll work under him for the time being and slaughter every human in Shibuya save one. We're gonna jump to another scene that highlights his presence once again. The fight with Jogo has been raging on, and he's throwing everything he has at Sukuna. All he's got left is a maximum meteor, a massive fireball that has everyone else in the vicinity looking to escape its range or suffer certain death. And yet it's so beneath him that Sukuna literally finds others in the area trying to escape and tells them to stop, which they do without hesitation. Talk about command. He forbids them moving until he says the word now. And think about that. With this massive meteor, that means certain death for these people. If they get hit, they comply. They'd rather take their chances with the meteor. And that says everything you need to know about the type of power and command Sukuna wields. He really makes them wait it out too. Remember, he's fighting the guy that threw this thing, and he's so unaffected by it that he's messing around with others while his opponent is playing his trump card. And we know it's powerful because we see the meteor cause massive destruction to everything in the vicinity, and yet we see Sukuna chilling on the ground, literally sitting, taunting Jogo more. This type of aura is special. And it isn't only limited to his on-screen persona either. It applies to us as actual viewers as well, because every time he's on your screen, he's the best part of what you're watching. It's one thing to be treated as the biggest deal on the show by the characters, and another entirely to actually be that for the viewer. There's an extremely fine line between being naturally cool and being a try-hard edgelord, and he is firmly on the side of the former. A few other things I want to touch on that are key components of Sukuna's greatness are his intelligence and perception, which, speaking of, show your own intelligence and perception by liking this video and subbing to the channel. Anyway, we already saw a glimpse of his intellect when he declines Jogo's offer and says his own plans have been going accordingly, but it goes so much deeper than that. We get further confirmation when Urame pops up, and he says that it won't be long until his plans are enacted and that everything has been going according to plan. As soon as Megumi begins casting to summon Maharaga, Sukuna, despite not being involved, catches on right away. Megumi is clearly important to Sukuna's plan, and he instantly diagnoses that 1, Maharaga is a much higher threat than anyone else, and 2, if he wants to keep Megumi alive, he needs to defeat Maharaga. When that fight begins, you see his next level perception repeatedly. Sukuna blocks Maharaga's very first attack, and then immediately senses something is off and retreats as Maharaja's arm had begun to activate an attack when they were in close quarters. Later on in that fight, there's a point where Maharaga loses part of his head, quickly putting it back in place. Sukuna notices that, and after an attack, actually says something seems off. Remember, these guys are fighting at ultra-high speeds through smoke, debris, and rubble, so to have such an innate sense of everything going on around him at all times is ridiculous. He even notices how Maharaga responds to his own attacks, and points out that his foe must be able to see them. A lot of times in anime, a character will say something like, "I can see your attacks now," to throw their opponent off their game, but Maharaga is nonverbal. This is all observation skills. This is even further explored when he notices the wheel revolving on Maharaga and deduces that it allows him to continuously adapt, like Doomsday, for example. Just for measure, he even relates that ability to someone else he knew of or fought in the past, which is just another instance of how vast Sukuna's knowledge really is. Realizing the only way to defeat Maharaga is with his domain, he uses Malevolent Shrine, while keeping fully in mind to make sure the guaranteed hit effect distance is large enough to destroy Maharaga, but small enough to not impact a nearby Megumi. Then to show this off one last time, after the fight, but before he loses control of Yuji's body, he quickly moves Megumi to a healer for safety, showing that he knew exactly where a healer was the whole time, then right back to the center of the destruction, just so he can mess with Yuji's head. And he even does all of us a solid, turning the Shibuya incident into the Shibuya miracle, by killing off Shigumo once and for all. And this enhanced perception is not random. There's a very specific purpose for it. It's how Sukuna fights. If you've noticed, he's a reactionary fighter. He likes to goad opponents into striking first, and then counters their moves based on deducing their attacks or techniques. If he deems someone an annoyance, sure, he'll eliminate them instantly. But in legitimate fights, he's not the one striking first. He's taunting his opponent into doing so, and then countering based on what he sees. And that even extends to his moveset. Cleave and Dismantle are attacks that don't require him to get close to his target, and he only uses one of them up front because they're used differently, showing he always has something left up in his bag of tricks. When he mimics Jogo's fire, that's again used from distance, and he refuses to reveal the technique. Malevolent Shrine is also more of a long-range based attack. Even the ability where he can form another mouth on his body is used in a reactionary way, as he uses it to block attacks against him. It's not that he can't fight in close quarters. He obviously can, but the way he fights is intentionally based to react and counter his opponents, and keeping his distance is one method he uses to do so. And let's be honest, He's straight up compelling. He's so fun to watch because he's having so much fun, while still maintaining an element of intrigue because to this point, we know so little about him. Maharaga is clearly on another level than other threats we've seen. Even still, Sukuna grabs a drink and a Dune 2 popcorn bucket, this really is the worst timeline, while analyzing his opponent's attack and perfectly diagnosing it. When he realizes Maharaga can see his technique, how does he react? He sits on a light pole chilling, waiting to be attacked, and it even looks like he's taking a bow at his own performance. When fighting Jogo, Sukuna is tearing his foe's body apart without even touching him. Then as buildings blow up, you see him casually walking in one of them like he's taking a late night stroll. At one point, the city is literally melting around him, and he looks so casual and unbothered, easily shredding and dodging every attack or creature sent his way. The collateral damage is massive, but he's just having himself a blast. He clearly loves the thrill, and he's taunting Jogo and egging him to continue on the entire time. When he asks Jogo why he isn't using his domain, and Jogo responds it's because he knows he can't compete, Sukuna just decides he'll use Jogo's own firepower himself and beat Jogo with his own moves. He won't reveal his technique, of course, because he's the counter fighter, and you can't counter him if you don't know how he's fighting. Then they set the stage for this fire versus fire duel, and we instantly cut to see Jogo in the afterlife. And while Jogo's in the afterlife, Sukuna just follows him there. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. He goes on a rant about Jogo's ideals being meaningless because he lacked the hunger to truly become what he wanted, and that he should have burned everything to the ground instead of placing value in such things like measuring worth against each other. And then, when you think he's going to embarrass him one last time, you're thrown for a loop. Sukuna goes out of his way to acknowledge Jogo's strength and admits to have been being entertained by him. Jogo starts tearing up in validation and asks what he's feeling, to which Sukuna responds, "I wouldn't know." Then we cut back to real life and Jogo's burning corpse. Sukuna is so compelling that characters he's involved with feel more interesting just because they interact with him. Jogo is enhanced as a character and now someone you feel something for. Megumi is a character who feels vastly more important now that Sukuna has plans for him, and Yuji is now far more interesting for having to wrestle with the fact of what Sukuna did to others while using his body, which, by the way, is one of the biggest FUs ever. Because Sukuna was forced into taking over, he didn't have to adhere to the vow he made with Yuji. Knowing this, not only did he cause immense destruction and death, right before he loses control, he transports Yuji right to the center of it all just so that he can admire his work. So yeah, all of those things are cool, but how does that make him a potential GOAT candidate? Here's your answer. Because of the writing. Not only is all of this stuff entertaining to watch, it's written extremely consistently. It hasn't been revealed yet, but I would bet anything that Sukuna came from nothing to gain his power, because that allows everything else with his character to fall in line. A guy coming from nothing would certainly have those hedonistic traits of acting purely for one's own desires and placing such value on strength. Think of how it puts the conversation with Jogo in a different light, saying that doing everything to obtain power isn't only what Jogo should do, but what Sukuna did. And once you've abandoned everything that makes you human in pursuit of strength, all you're left with is viewing everything as a game to be won, which is exactly how Sukuna treats his fights, and why he can't relate to what Jogo was feeling, and why he respects those with strength. Initially, someone who wasn't born with immense strength would also need to rely more on intelligence and perception to win their fights as well. Everything about the character makes so much sense, and it all stems from his past, which is simply beautiful writing. It's also a cool parallel to Gojo, who also values strength, but he was born with it, and he and Sukuna have completely opposite views on what to do with said strength. There are not many characters in anime with this level of writing, especially early on, and again, we've only scratched the surface because there's still clearly so much left to learn about him, which is why this entire video is focused strictly on potential. Oh, and just for fun, we have to remember all of this was Sukuna at 75% of his power, and he backed up everything he said he'd do in less than 3 episodes. If I haven't convinced you even slightly that Sukuna has a chance to be special, I want you to come up with the goofiest insults you possibly can and let me have it in the comments. Not explicit, goofy. Go full moist critical on me, alright? We'll see you next time.